Welcome to your virtual day trip. Annalise and I will take you with us as we journey to Westdean and Singleton, two villages in the beautiful South Downs National Park.
That's right, Luna, and all you have to do is get comfy and enjoy meeting our guests.
We're here in June, but whatever time of year you visit, you'll find plenty to see and do. We'll be exploring the glorious Westdean Gardens.
And we'll be meeting some skilled volunteers at the Weald and Downland Living Museum.
We love a walk and we promise you some breathtaking views across the South Downs.
Now, that is a lot to pack in. Come on, let's get started.
Our first stop is at Westdean Gardens in West Sussex, with its awe-inspiring restored garden situated at the foot of the South Downs.
There's a beautiful restaurant and a shop with plenty of free on-site parking. If you're taking public transport, you'll need to catch the number 60 bus that runs between Midhurst and Chichester.
The gardens are open all year round and you can purchase a visitor ticket for the day or enjoy the changing seasons of the garden by buying an annual membership.
It welcomes visitors to take a leisurely stroll around its grounds and discover its fascinating historical features.
With its unique trees and the renovated walled garden, one can't help but admire the abundance of creative and social heritage Westdean Gardens proudly showcases.
Let's go and meet Tom, who can tell us more.
My name's Tom Brown. I'm the head gardener at Westdean College and I'm responsible for around 100 acres of campus, which includes a 4.5 acre wall garden, 13 large Victorian greenhouses, an arboretum and about 30 acres of formal gardens. So at Westdean we've got around 100 acres and we've got 8 gardeners and 50 volunteers that help us tend this space, and principally Westdean is all about an arts and conservation college, so we do an awful lot of degree courses and day courses within the college, and the gardens attract around between 80 and 85,000 visitors a year, but the idea is that we've got a garden that people would love to visit and also a garden that will inspire the students within the college. So with a lot of planting that we're doing, we're trying to create seasonal highlights and we're trying to create scenes that people can appreciate with a watercolour, for example, or with some sculpture courses we tend to provide a lot of plants from the glass houses, big tropical plants for them to sculpt and draw. But yeah, there's an awful lot for people to see when they come. Obviously a big campus like this, we've got the 4.5 acre wall garden with a large kitchen garden where we produce as much vegetable and fruit as possible for the college and for our restaurants, and that's a real focus that we've been looking at over the last year or two to try and up the amount of produce that we deliver to the site, and we're doing all that without any chemicals and with no dig methods, so it's finding new ways to grow these vegetables a bit more sympathetically, I suppose. We've got a lot of interesting new projects in the actual sort of college grounds themselves. We're working with recycled concrete and looking at drought tolerant planting. So last summer we had a very dry, hot summer where a lot of our traditional garden plants like our peonies and our roses and our hydrangeas really suffered. Whereas some of the new plantings that we've put in that are arguably more tap rooted, some of the thistles and the umbellifers, like the carrot family, seem to be much more tolerant of those dry conditions because their root system is much deeper. So when we're looking at managing the garden going forward, we're looking at the kind of plants that we're using, because none of us really know what climate change is going to look like, but we do know that we're going to have to garden through extremes. So very dry spells, very wet spells, and it's finding a plant palette that will suit that. And also looking at things like chemical use, peat use, diesel and fuel use, how to manage big green spaces like this. It's a hugely challenging but really exciting time to be in sort of big gardens at the moment.
You can see why the gardens inspire those doing courses here.
And for those artists who've created stunning sculptures.
It's also a brilliant place to play.
Back to you, Tom.
This is an area of the garden that's been recently developed. It's a south-facing space with a nice flint wall at the back, and we're slightly elevated, so the drainage is enhanced. And when it comes to creating a plant community in this space, we've opted for more sort of subtropical, leafy, lush, jungle-like plants. And you can see in front of me I've got this canna, which traditionally was always lifted in the autumn and then overwintered in a frost-free place and then brought out again. because of the position of this part of the garden, these clumps are now 3 years old and they're huge. And given the cold, wet winter that we had last year, I'm amazed that they've all come through beautifully. And when it comes to plants that are resistant to this kind of weather that we're experiencing, actually hardy Japanese bananas and cannas seem to be contenders that seem to cope quite well. So you can have different looks in your garden and choose the plants depending on the kind of look that you want. But certainly I'm really encouraged by this sort of subtropical planting, and it's created a space around them when we can look at plants that are perhaps marginally hardy and they then will persist for many years. But I think where you've got plants that are marginally hardy, they need the drainage as well. So the winter wet and the cold often are bad bedfellows and they will kill plants. Whereas if you've got a dry cold and a free draining soil, quite often plants will get through that. So with the extra drainage, I think the plants are on the front foot. But I look forward to sort of building a community up around this garden that give us this lovely sort of lush look, but is more resilient in terms of the hot, dry summers that we have.
I love how Tom talks about his plant community.
Do you know what? I can imagine all those little plants having a lovely chat about the weather, commenting on the visitors that walk past them.
Well, let's take a moment to do the same and enjoy a sit down on one of the many benches in the gardens.
The sound of water is incredibly calming. I might have a bit of a nap now.
No time. Tom's got more to tell us.
So we're now in a part of the garden where we're dealing with extremes. We've got the river running through the garden here, and you can see the lovely sound effects and the sort of the feel that it gives to this part of the garden. But then to my left, we've got our dry meadow where we're growing a community of plants that are drought tolerant, but we're growing them through recycled concrete. And this was quite a brave project to take on, because we cleared a space and then imported 120 tonnes of recycled concrete from down the road and produced a 10 centimetre layer across the whole site. We then planted last March through that concrete, so in effect the top 2/3 of the root balls of the plants were in contact with the concrete and the bottom third was in contact with the very rubbly soil below. We watered it once and then left it, and obviously the drought of last summer, walking around the garden, this part of the garden was absolutely thriving, and there was a fair moisture content within the concrete, and the amount of pollinators and insects that were flying around was colossal. So the reason that we landed on the concrete was there's a lot of studies in Canada, and people have been planting through concrete and compost and sand, and they found that by mixing more sand and green waste compost in the concrete, the plants grew a bit better, but you got a lot more weeds. So by actually going pure concrete, the plants were growing harder, meaning they don't need to be staked because they're not as big and floppy as they would be in a border, for example. And there was a lot less weed growth, so that's what we opted for. And I think on reflection, looking at a project like this, there are issues about bringing a man-made product like concrete, recycled concrete, into a garden. But then if you're going to use gravel or slate or something similar, where's that going to be mined from? The fact that we're not using water in this part of the garden, and the fact that it's such a benefit to wildlife and pollinators, for me, I'm sort of have been wrestling with it for the last year, but have landed on the sort of assumption that actually it's very positive. We're gardening without using natural resources, we're increasing insect populations, and we're reusing a product that would otherwise end up on a building site somewhere. And so it's, with gardens like Westdean, we're finding that we're being experimental, and I think members of the public and our visitors can rely on this garden for a good while to keep pushing those boundaries and working out what people can do with their own spaces and on a more sort of domestic scale. But let us experiment and let us take the hit if we need to. And with the planting that we've got in the dry meadow through the concrete, a lot of the plants are grown from seed in-house. So where we're creating a meadow, you want to see a particular flower flowering throughout the site. So to do that, we needed to achieve reasonable numbers. So the other benefit of this project is that we've been able to produce a lot of it from seed. We will continue to harvest the seed and then top up any gaps if they appear, and then we sell them through the Westdean nursery. So actually a lot of the plants that we're now producing on site for our visitors are grown here as well in peat-free compost, so we're being a lot more accountable and sustainable in the way that we produce plants. But it's a really exciting group of plants in terms of the species material, because we can continue to harvest from it as well. And it's a cyclical thing. And with this particular planting, my final point with it really, I suppose, is that you're looking at gardens in a slightly different way. So with a traditional formal herbaceous border, you had a clump of delphiniums at the back, and you would often move heaven and earth to keep that delphinium clump the same size, in the same place. You would stake it, you would move it, you would replant it. With this sort of planting, it's a lot more dynamic. So plants may die, but then they might reseed themselves just round the corner, and you're allowing that community to stay diverse. There are going to be some plants in there that want to take over the world, and we just need to keep an eye on them and reduce them as necessary. But keeping that community and that diversity intact is the most important thing, and how to do that really challenges us as gardeners, how to deal with plants slightly differently.
It's great that after a visit to the gardens you can buy plants from the shop.
I wonder if Tom would pop round and plant them for me.
I think he's far too busy for that. You'll have to don your gardening gloves and do that yourself, Luna.
So we're in a much more productive part of the gardens now, the walled kitchen garden, more traditional if you like, and when it comes to growing food, we've tried to be a bit more focused about what we do. So rather than growing a few spring onions every week, we decided to celebrate a particular fruit or vegetable that month, and then the following month look at something different. So we're in the middle of June now, and we're currently celebrating carrots that have been grown under fleece, broad beans and garlic and onions. So what we will do is look at harvesting all those throughout the month, sending them down to the various kitchens, and then when they're cleared we'll be looking at plants like fennel and zinnias that will replace those crops, which will still give us something to grow in the ground until the winter. So when people are gardening at home, a way to sort of spend your time more wisely, arguably, with vegetable growing is to sort of celebrate a particular plant and have crops that you like to grow, and then choose those crops that are going to give you something to eat over a long period of time, particularly during the winter months. And we found with crops such as beetroot that we'll have a summer crop of beetroot, and then we'll sow some more beetroot in September, because it's very challenging to produce food at home in January, February and March. So what we're looking at doing is storing and curing and drying plants that we can have fresh produce through the winter. So with the beetroot, we'll put them in what we call a clamp, which is damp, cold sand, and the beetroot, where all the foliage is removed, and the cold sand keeps them in a sort of suspended animation through the winter months. And then we reveal them from the sand in February and then send them down to the kitchens in February. So it's being a bit crafty with some crops, but think about drying things like borlotti beans, curing squashes, beetroots, carrots in clamps to get you through those lean months in the winter.
Annalise, you grow fruit and veg. Have you picked up some top tips?
Yes, I have. I'm going to get my calendar out and start planning what to grow for the next 12 months.
Fantastic. I look forward to sampling your crops.
But now, let's follow this pathway to the far end of the garden. Tom's waiting for us.
So another feature of the garden that we're working on is a woodland bed border, if you like, along this river, this Winterbourne River that we have running through the garden from November to June mostly every year, depending on the water table. So it's a lovely bit of animation through the garden. And talking about building plant communities, where we're trying to build the drought tolerant community, the slightly tender subtropical community, this is going to be our woodland community down here. And when we're looking at a garden project like this, we're also considering the ecology and wildlife and the benefits that we can bring to wildlife. So not only are you incorporating a lot of our homemade compost as a surface mulch to try and kickstart all of the soil biology and get lots of lovely invertebrates working through the soil to make a healthy soil, we're also using a lot of dead wood and timber. So with a lot of the tree work that we have around the estate and around the gardens where a tree may die or fall down, rather than processing that wood, we're starting to look at it as an opportunity to create a habitat. So when I saw these 3 hollowed out logs, I couldn't miss the opportunity to nab them for this particular project. So in terms of a process, we've cleared the beds, we've now put down our homemade compost, and behind me Chantel, our senior gardener, is now just spreading some of the compost with a digger based on the path, so she's not creating too much compaction. Because it's a very hot time of year, we don't want lots of people sort of shoveling compost in a 30-degree heat. So we're trying to use mechanical means where we can to save people's blushes. But once it's settled, we'll then be looking at planting great big drifts of things like Japanese anemones, geraniums, actias, and ferns. So it'll be a very lush community of plants that will enjoy this sort of condition. As you can see, it's a nice bit of relief in some shade here too, and we'll find the plants that like this space as much as I do at the moment.
Thank you so much, Tom. You are a font of gardening knowledge.
And what stunning gardens Westdean has. So many different areas to explore and be inspired by.
You're right, Annalise, and I think this is the perfect moment to mirror the abundance of creativity here at Westdean and start our craft activity. What are we making today?
Well, we've been surrounded by the beautiful planting and listening to Tom speak so passionately about the produce, plants and flowers, we're going to make a paper posy.
Ooh, a perfect gift for a friend or to brighten up your sideboard. Let's get started. Let's make a paper posy. You'll need a few things. For the flower, use a strip of paper measuring 30 by 7 centimetres. We've cut ours from a length of A4 paper and we're using the colour pink. For each flower stem, you'll need an A5 sheet of green paper, which is half the size of a standard A4 sheet. You'll also need scissors, a glue stick and some sticky tape. If you have a knitting needle or a pencil handy, that will also help. Step 1. Start with a long strip of paper for the flower and fold it over 2 centimetres lengthwise. Then cut the paper into 1 centimetre sections or thereabouts along the length. Be careful not to cut past the 2 centimetre fold. Step 2. Now use your knitting needle or pencil to curl each of the 1 centimetre sections. Step 3. Now you'll make the flower stem. Spread some glue on the paper. This will help stick everything together as you roll the paper diagonally from one side to the other using your knitting needle or pencil. Once you start rolling, you'll establish the shape. So if your pencil isn't as wide as the paper, you can take it out and roll without it. Once you've rolled it all up, secure the paper point with a piece of tape. Step 4. Now let's combine our flower with its stalk. Take your time here. Spread some glue down the length of the uncurled side of the coloured paper. Take your green paper stem and start at one end of the flower and roll it up. When you get to the end, secure it with a piece of tape. You might want to ask a friend to help here, and then you can do the same for them. If you have some spare green paper, you can cut them into strips and make some luscious leaves. You can use a selection of colourful paper to create a vibrant paper posy. Have fun creating your own.
Oh Luna, I think I'm going to be making quite a few of these paper posies. Everyone's going to want one.
But before you go back to the craft table, let's take a short trip down the road from Westdean to Singleton for some extra inspiration. We're going to the Weald and Downland Living Museum, where I think my first stop will probably be the shop and cafe. I hear it has a beautiful view of the mill pond and watermill.
Okay, but we won't film ourselves in those, will we? Otherwise people will just be watching us eating cake and shopping.
Oh yeah, you're right. We'll save that for later. Now, Annalise, I bet you have a Blue Peter badge, don't you?
Sadly not, no. Why?
Shame. You would have got free entry. If only you tried a bit harder to create something out of washing up bottles and loo rolls.
Never mind. I'm happy to pay to experience this rich rural history. Did you know it spans over 1,000 years?
Amazing! And if you fancy walking, there are several routes across this 40-acre site, so a great opportunity to get out into the glorious landscape and explore.
But we're going to focus on a couple of the authentic historic houses, of which there are 50, each relocated from different areas of the Weald and Downland that stretches across East and West Sussex and into Kent, Surrey and Hampshire.
Gosh, it's incredible, isn't it, that these historic buildings have been preserved and are now open for us to observe how people lived in them across different eras.
Let's get going. I'm so eager to experience the past and observe how people used to live.
Well, first stop is the blacksmiths, built in the mid-19th century using inexpensive but sturdy materials.
And the interior is what it would have looked like in about 1910.
Let's hear from Nigel and Keith.
I'm Nigel. I started blacksmithing when I retired. I retired slightly early when I was 57, and we live in Midhurst, and I've been coming here as a visitor for years, and I thought I'll go and do some volunteering because that'll salve my conscience for not getting another proper job. And I can remember I thought I'd better go and have a last look round, make sure I still like the place before I stick my head above the parapet. And I came on a Wednesday and I got talking to the Wednesday blacksmith, who said, if you're going to volunteer, say you want to be a blacksmith. He said, you'll be a room steward, otherwise you won't like that. Say you want to be a blacksmith. I said, well, nice idea, yes, but. And I did do some blacksmithing at school, but that was many years ago, and I haven't actually done any since. He said, don't worry, what we're trying to do is to get an assistant for each of the blacksmiths. So you will be the boy. You'll pump the bellows, you'll hold the metal when you need it, and you'll learn the trade. I said, okay, I'll go for that. And I'm now the boss. After 15 years, I've graduated to being in charge of Tuesdays anyway. And so the first call on our services here is the museum's buildings. Most of the metalwork in these buildings would have been made somewhere just like this. So if you've got someone on site and a hinge breaks or you need a new latch or whatever, bring it down to the blacksmiths. Can you make one of those? So we do a certain amount of that. We then make stuff that's used in the buildings. So if you go and say the Tudor kitchen, all the cooking utensils and stuff we made in here at various times over the years. We do odd things that are sort of just on their own around the museum site, like the gates and that sort of thing. And we make stuff that's sold in the shop. We have a fair range of friends who say, oh, we couldn't take this in the forge and straighten it out for me and whatever. So there's not normally any shortage of things to do. It's certainly, I'm only here on Tuesdays, but Tuesdays go pretty quickly. I do sleep well Tuesday nights, it's true, but it's great. It's been fabulous, as I say, 15 years now I've been doing it. So I can thoroughly recommend volunteering to be a blacksmith to anyone who fancies doing it. Blacksmithing. Blacksmiths work with iron and steel mostly, which when it's cold is very hard and very difficult to shape, but has this charming characteristic that if you heat it up enough it becomes softer and you can bend it and shape it and make things out of it. So we buy in steel in different cross sections, different sizes, and you choose a bit that you think is suitable for the job you're going to do, heat it up and set about it, usually with a hammer. There are other techniques, but basically most of it is hammering. And by hammering downwards you can reduce the cross section. By hammering sideways you can spread things out. By hammering on the end of bars you can make them bigger actually. That's quite hard work, but everything that we do consists basically of heating it up and changing its shape. And when you end up with something like this, which I was making earlier, the sort of techniques involved have been, obviously this all started out as a piece of bar, this 10mm square bar. So this bit here had to be hammered down to quite a small size to make this stem. This bit had to be spread out wider because it's more than 10mm. That had to be bent round and twisted, wrapped round. Then we put a twisty bit in the middle, which everyone loves. Kids particularly just can't believe how you do this because it's ever so simple and it's such an elegant effect, and providing you get the heat even, you end up with the twists even, and that's just fabulous. And then put a point on this end, and hey presto, one poker.
I'm Keith, and I came here about 8-9 years ago as a volunteer, having moved to the area, back to the area. Originally I was a farmer's boy, so I knew a little bit about this area. I used to bring my mum here when she was alive many years ago. So I needed something else to do, so and was asked what would I like, and they suggested I might like to be a horseman, and I said no, I don't think I would, and I said I'd much prefer to be a blacksmith. So they said, well, we'll give you a trial and see if you can do it. And I thought, well, I'll have a go, and the rest is history. About 5 or 6 years ago I came in here, and I still make awful stuff, but it's good fun, and occasionally it goes right, and when it goes right I get quite excited. So that's what I do. I talk most of the time and make funny things, other bits of the time.
Somewhere around the museum is a fabulous chest, which is a 2/3 size replica of one from Hereford Cathedral. One in Hereford Cathedral they knew the date of exactly, and it fitted in exactly right with one of the houses. So they said, right, what we want is that, but a bit smaller. So the museum carpenter hollowed this oak trunk out to make the wooden parts, and then we put lots and lots of metal banding around it, because that's what they used to do to stop people setting about oak chests with an axe. And that was quite a challenge, because although it's all more or less the same size, every bit had to be individually made. So we made the banding, we made the hinges, we made the nails, we made the latches and everything for it, and that took months. But it's still around, and it will be around forever, which is lovely.
Thanks, Nigel and Keith. What a great role you play here. Luna, are you visiting a horse in that stable?
No, this stable's filled with beautiful dried flowers and plant pots. What a treat!
And talking of flowers, there are lots in the garden of the house we're about to visit, which used to be a pair of railway cottages.
And the family would have grown fruit and vegetables throughout the year. Gosh, Tom at Westdean would have been very impressed.
He would. Should we go and see who's inside?
My name is Cindy. I'm a volunteer at the Weald and Downland Living Museum, and today we've been rag rugging, but we do all kinds of things here. So both Kirsty and I work in the Tudor kitchen. We do stewarding of houses, spinning, knitting, darning, sewing, all kinds of things really to bring our exhibits alive, and it's fun.
I'm Kirsty. I'm also a volunteer here, getting on for 5 years now, and been extremely lucky. Not only am I a Victorian lady from time to time, I'm also a Tudor cook, and I do some Saxon weaving. But this is my happy place, and this is why I'm here.
So this building came from Ashtead in Surrey, and it dates back to 1860, originally built for farm workers. But because it was on the side of the railway line in Ashtead, quite quickly the railway porter and his wife and 8 children moved in. And this room would have been for cooking, eating, entertaining, working, rag rugging, ironing, washing, absolutely everything would have happened in here.
The room behind this room is unheated, and there's no cooking facilities there. So it's not a kitchen. It's probably what they would have called a scullery. It would be for food prep and for keeping food and for washing up and dirty jobs like boot polishing and that kind of thing, polishing the brass perhaps. Because it was unheated, it was quite safe to keep food there. People of course didn't have fridges, there was no electricity. This whole house was built very, very cheaply. It's got brick in the firewall between the 2 cottages. It's got brick in the foundations, but all the rest is just wood and plaster. And the whole, this part of the cottage is 12 foot across and 20 foot deep. But it does have a little wash house at the back and a privy around the corner. Rag rugging is probably a lot older than we think. But before we had the cheaper cottons, printed cottons in great colours in Victorian times, the colours were duller. So it wouldn't have stood out so much. It would have been useful and it would have been hard wearing, and they quite often used wool. But when you get to the Victorian times, a lot of households made their own clothes. It wasn't uncommon for a housewife to have a sewing machine. She inherited from her mother even. And when you make your own clothes, you will have cut bits that isn't good for anything else, too small. And then children will grow out of the clothes. They will absolutely ruin them, and when they've been mended so many times you can't mend them anymore, then you cut them up, and that children and old ladies could sit and do that. It would be something to do on a dark, cold evening when you couldn't really go out. So this is why it became so popular, and it is actually quite getting a comeback now. People are starting wanting to do it again.
And the thing is, with a rag rug, for a family rag rug, every piece will have a memory attached to it. So you would, in 20, 30 years' time, look on the floor and think, gosh, that was my old school dress, or Granny's blouse, or Mum's apron, or something. So there's a delight in it. It's not just a thing to have on the floor to keep you warm, but it has memories attached to it, and that gives it a special significance, really.
When you start making a rag rug, you first need the fabric to make it on. It's always been used hessian because hessian's got big holes in it and the threads move easily, which means that when you're using your tool, you can go underneath a couple of threads, get hold of your piece of fabric, which is normally about that long, about that wide, and it gets pulled halfway through. Some people will knot it, and it's totally unnecessary because you have so many tight bits together. It is totally safe.
Yeah, you would do a bit at a time when you could fit it in amongst other things. It wouldn't be like a task like the washing, the laundry or anything like that would be. It would be an ongoing, especially in the winter evenings, isn't it?
Exactly.
Sitting doing something, as you say, with it over, almost like a rug over your knees. It would have been quite a pleasant activity then.
Gosh, I'm inspired to make my own rag rug.
I know, so am I. It is practical and it keeps your knees warm whilst you're making it.
The perfect winter hobby.
I love exploring this place and everything is so well signposted, including the all-important toilets.
There's so much to see and lovely places to sit and admire the views.
And we have another treat in store as we're headed to a house that has a flint and brick exterior from the early to mid 17th century. But inside we step back further in time to see the remains of a medieval timber-framed building. And today it's hosting a cookery demonstration.
Hi, I'm Madeline Owens and I'm a volunteer here at the Weald and Downland Museum. I suppose I'm involved in two key areas. One is working with schools that come in and helping to run workshops with schools. And I also come in as a general volunteer stewarding the buildings. Well, we generally make drop scones as part of a workshop that we do with visiting school children, and they're learning, they're doing Victorians at the time. So what we're showing them is the kind of foods that would have been available to a family that weren't very well off. We talk them through things like where they would have bought these items, that you couldn't go to a supermarket, you had to go to different kinds of shops, and talking through what those different shops might have been. We talk to them about how they would keep food fresh, and which foods they'd have struggled to keep fresh and why. And we do it in this particular house because although this house actually is a lot older than Victorian, it clearly was lived in by people during Victorian times, and actually during the late 19th century the house would have looked very similar to how we've set it up now. They wouldn't have had indoor plumbing, they wouldn't have had electricity, they would have had a very simple way of life. When we make the drop scones in here, and we're doing it with a school group, each of the children put one item of the ingredients in, taking turns to do that. So we start off with 3 tablespoons of flour. We use wholemeal flour that's milled here in our mill. Additionally, we then put in a tablespoonful of sugar and a small teaspoon of baking powder. Then make a well in the mix, so one of the children will mix it round and then make a well in it, and break an egg, whisk it up first, and then pour that egg into the well in the bowl. I then start mixing the flour into that from the middle so that it doesn't form lumps, so doing it carefully from the middle, and as the flour gets incorporated, I can see how much milk I need to add, so I gradually incorporate the milk until I get a sort of reasonable dropping consistency of the pancake mix. Then that's ready for dropping onto the griddle to cook. So first of all, we need to make sure that the griddle is hot enough. So we have the griddle over our open fire, and we just put a little bit of butter on the griddle to hear the sizzle and make sure we can tell from the sizzle that it's hot enough. And then when I've put the drops of the mix onto the griddle, I'm then waiting to see the bubbles in the top of the pancake, and that shows me that the bicarbonate is starting to activate. And when it stops being shiny on the top, I know that they're cooked through from the base, and I can just flip them over and quickly cook the other side at that point. Then they're ready, takes minutes.
Madeline is right, they're super quick to make.
And eat.
Well, whilst I polish the rest of them off, let's hear from the man who built this magnificent fire.
Hi, my name's Graham and I steward some of the houses and also do some of the school's work. During this period, obviously they would have cooked on an open fire. So we have an open fire and a crane above it with a griddle, and that griddle is what they would have cooked on as we cooked the drop scones today. The fire we've got here, again, would be typical of what they would use. We have the back plate and then the fire dogs, which will hold the wood and keep the wood up so that there is a current of air going underneath them. And the tools here were also made in the forge. So we have pokers and tongs and shovels that will be typical again of the period, all made here in our own forge and used regularly for tending the fire here. Volunteers here come every day. The place really only runs on the basis of the number of volunteers here. So there are probably in excess of a dozen every day and in excess of many hundreds who come here regularly. Some with particular skills, some who will be operating in the bakery, some will be operating the mill and the blacksmith shop. Others who come here with their knowledge of history, and so we'll use that to tell the visitors about the different houses and who would have lived there and how they would have lived. The reason many of us volunteer is because we really want to give something back. So to come here and use the knowledge that perhaps we've got and more that we acquire through coming on courses and learning more about the houses and their history. So a lot of people do that as part of their voluntary giving. And there are a lot of people doing it very regularly, and it makes the whole place work incredibly well.
Thanks, Madeline and Graham. You've given us just what we need to fuel our walk today.
We are saying goodbye to the Weald and Downland Living Museum now and heading across the road into the village of Singleton for a walk in the South Downs National Park with Kate.
My name's Kate Drake. I'm the Health and Wellbeing Officer at South Downs National Park. Leven Down, otherwise known as Leave Alone Hill, is a site of scientific interest, and it's a beautiful area that's managed by the Sussex Wildlife Trust. And the reason why we leave it alone, because it's allowed to just come into its wildness, so we can have a whole array of different species and butterflies and birds and flowers really taking root in on this piece of land. And the kind of species that you would find in this area are kites and buzzards and kestrels and lots of different chalk grassland wildflowers, which are full at this present moment in time because we're in the summertime, and also wild orchids, which are really prevalent around autumn time. And then the butterflies, we sometimes find chalk grassland butterflies here, and a Dodos blue, which is a very unique butterfly to this type of habitat. And we call it chalk grassland because that's one of the natural characteristics of the South Downs National Park, and it's really, really full of diversity. And if you were to take a metre square and place it on the ground and you were to count and to monitor all the species, there'd be the same amount of species when this site is managed well, which it is at the moment, as you'd find in the Amazon rainforest. So it's a unique area. And the reason why it's of scientific interest is because of the diversity that you find here, which means that it has to be managed in a certain way. So it's a beautiful place to come in the summer, in the autumn, in the winter, and also in the spring. It just changes its qualities depending on what time of year that you come here. So today is summer solstice day, which means it's the longest day of the year and the shortest night of the year. And the difference between today, in terms of hours and minutes, to winter solstice is that there's an 8-hour, 47-minute longer daylight hours than there would be on a winter solstice, which is the 21st of December. So it's an amazing day. So it's beautiful, full of sun. I'm sat on a bench here right on the edge of Leven Down, and I can see, there's a panoramic view that I can see, and in the distance there's an Iron Age fort just behind me, which is called the Trundle, and that is 647 feet above sea level. And it's a beautiful area to see out at some of the vistas across the South Downs, We've also got the Weald and Downland Museum, Living Museum, which again is a beautiful place to go to, very accessible site that talks about the history of Sussex through various mediums. And then right in the distance we have Goodwood Estate, which again is, if you look on their website, there's a lot of things that you can do there. But in terms of the South Downs National Park, getting out and about is just so good for your health and well-being, and that's what my role is, to encourage people to come out and about. So there's a plethora of footpaths that are accessible and where people can come, and there are actual places where you can hire mobility scooters as well if you've got mobility issues. So we have a place on our website that actually highlights where those places are. But just as an example, at Pulborough Brooks there are mobility scooters. At Seven Sisters Country Park there's access to mobility scooters. And we have all that information on our website. In terms of being able to get to sites by bus, we have a whole range of walks that you can access through getting on a bus or by train as well. And again, that information is all on our website. And the benefits of being in the national park are huge. I know for me personally, I just feel so much better when I've been out in being blown by the wind, being caressed by the sun. I just come away feeling so much better and full of zest really, and full of life. There's just so much to be grateful for, and just being outside can have such a calming effect on us.
It sounds like the perfect moment for us to explore our senses with Kate.
This is an exercise that you could do at home. You could do it sitting down, maybe looking out at something green into your garden, or even looking at a houseplant. But better still, if you can get outside, that would be great. So just take a few moments. Again, you can do it sitting or standing, but just find your feet on the ground and take a couple of breaths. Come to your breath and breathe in and out. Coming back to your breath, leaving behind all the things that you've been doing this morning or this afternoon, and all the things you've got to do. Just come into the here and now, coming back to your breath. And the invitation is to just notice. What do you notice with your 5 senses? In terms of touch, what can you feel against your skin? Maybe the wind, maybe the sun, maybe your clothes just brushing up against your skin. Just notice and breathe into your sense of touch. An invitation is to notice your sense of hearing. What sounds can you hear? The sounds of the birds, of the wind, maybe those sounds that you can hear inside, those non-human sounds. See if you can focus on those non-human sounds. Just allowing yourself to come back to your breath. And then take a breath in through your nose. And see what scents are being carried by the wind or in the air today. Today I can smell the scent of blossom, of the earth, of the greenery around me. But maybe you can smell scents in your house or in your own garden. And allow yourself to breathe into that. And now take a breath in through your mouth. And just notice your sense of taste, the moisture in your mouth. Maybe there's some leftover lunch or breakfast or dinner, or there's some drinks that you can taste in your mouth. And really notice what tastes are around. And then just see what sense that you're drawn to. Is it your sense of sound, your sense of touch, your sense of smell, or your sense of taste? And take a couple more breaths. And when you're ready, just look around and see what you can see. Maybe there are butterflies, or maybe there's a tree or grass or blossom or your plant. Just notice what you can see and how you're feeling. And you can take this exercise and you can do it for as long or as short as you like. Just an opportunity to come into your senses and into the here and now to slow things down. Thank you, Kate. Tapping into our senses is the perfect way to end our virtual day trip here in the South Downs National Park.
What a lovely day! Who knew there was so much going on in Westdean and Singleton?
I know! I've had a brilliant time. We've met some lovely people and learnt loads of new things.
We hope you've enjoyed your South Downs virtual day trip too.
Bye for now!
This virtual day trip was created by Whistlestop Arts in partnership with Age UK, West Sussex, Brighton and Hove.
And the Arthur and Doreen Green Fund at Sussex Community Foundation funded it. Thank you to everybody who has supported this project.
For more resources and information about the work that we're involved in, please visit whistlestoparts.org.